All right, welcome back to the Awakening Innovations podcast. This is Michael Barnes, your host. And today we have an international guest. His name is Kirk Meighoo. And I ran into him on LinkedIn, where he has a lot of great videos and podcasts and that kind of stuff. So definitely check him out. And I'll put the link in the show notes. And Dr. Kirk Meighoo is a former senator from Trinidad and Tobago, if you know where that is. And he's lived and traveled in various places around the globe. He's a former university lecturer, author, academic, TV, and podcast host. He has exited academia, however, ruffling a number of feathers along the way, which our listeners will probably understand that I love. And currently, he helps others to do the same sort of thing. He also works a lot with charities, NGOs, and NPOs, which, again, as our listeners know, is a big passion of mine. So welcome, Dr. Kirk Meighoo, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you for having me, and hello to your audience. And of course, you can just call me Kirk.
Okay. Thank you, Kirk. So thank you. Tell us a little bit about you. The way I always ask the question is, how did you get to this point in life?
Yeah, I suppose that there are many ways you can define the point I'm at, depending on the dimension you're looking at.
Yes.
I mean, basically, let's see. In a sense, I'm in my own mind. I have to tell you, I'm on the same path I've always been. But for others externally, it might seem different.
Yes.
Because for me, when I was in academia, academia was always like a means to an end in a certain way. Because I was always interested in social change. I won't say always. I mean, that's another story. Like when I was about 16, right? That like my whole world changed at that point. And I'm just to give you and your listeners some context. That's sometime in the 1980s, right? Like around 84, something like that, 85, and you know, around that time, that was if your listeners are of that age, they would remember Amnesty International and Do They Know It's Christmas and all these concerts and musicians.
Live Aid and that kind of stuff.
Live Aid, Band Aid, We Are the World, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And then you had all the Nicaraguan stuff and the El Salvador stuff and all that, and apartheid and all that kind of stuff. It just it was actually religion class. My religion class that opened all that stuff up, because I was just into computers and art and stuff like that and whatever. I had no idea about the world outside.
So this was high school when you were 16?
Yeah. It was like...
so this was in Trinidad?
No, actually, I was in Canada at the time.
Okay.
I was actually born in the US and I lived in Canada, and I went to I can't say I went back to Trinidad because I wasn't born there, but that's where my family's from. I mean, our family's now 6 generations in Trinidad.
Okay.
But my own parents had migrated, and I decided to go back in Trinidad when I was just 21. And it was all part of the whole sort of, social consciousness and trying to change the world, that kind of stuff. And I always thought of, being in academia as part of that, as, understanding the world, changing people's consciousness. And, I suppose getting behind the, I don't want to sound too harsh or radical or whatever, but the lies that were fed, in the mainstream media and so forth. So I've always thought it, as leading to that. I was always, admiring public intellectuals and I suppose, I wanted to be one,
Right. Did you have any...
That's how I saw it.
Anyone specific that you admired at that point? Do you remember?
Let's see, the first, first, when my consciousness was first done, I went back to my teenage years with you. So it was like, it was mainly musicians, right? Musicians
Yeah.
and celebrities. That was it. And I was a musician. I still play. I love playing
What do you
music.
play?
Guitar, bass, drums, keyboards.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Yeah. Um, and so yeah, so I was like really influenced by them. And later on, as I started to read and stuff, I mean, CLR James, who was a Trinidadian Marxist intellectual, was a profound influence on me. But before, George Orwell was big on me as well. Later on, V.S. Naipaul, ironically, because he's not a kind of social change person at all, but very important in my consciousness. Much later on, more like in the 1990s and 2000 and stuff, when my own political perspective started to change, and I started to kind of be skeptical of a lot of the save the world people.
Yes. Yeah.
Coming from the heart of it, I kind of knew a lot of the problems within the community.
Yes.
And yeah, so those were some of the people, but a lot of it initially were people like, you know, a lot of like left-wing Marxist intellectuals and more kind of cultural people like Stuart Hall, especially out of Britain, and like the cultural studies people. I'm not sure if you know them. And then later on the postmodernist people. Then later on in the 90s, when I kind of took a turn away from that, and like Camille Paglia, I especially loved. She was extremely important to me while I was doing my PhD thesis in terms of opening up my mind to other perspectives. But I've really ranged from left to right, from you know, a lot of extremes, a lot of fringe things. Malcolm X was huge for me.
Okay.
He's not an intellectual as such, but
cultural icon.
Yeah, you know, but certainly an amazing speaker and thinker and an incredibly intelligent man, you know. But yeah.
So that was high school, and then you mentioned graduate school.
Yeah.
So what did you do? What degree?
Right. Well, my undergrad was in international development studies, which was amazing for me because in school I did well in school, and I did well in a lot of different things, from arts to sciences to humanities, and I had no idea what I wanted to specialize in. I to this day I don't think I have it. I just love it all. And there was I mean, luckily, I mean, you know, my parents did not go to university, so I had no guidance whatsoever. They really had no clue. And luckily, I was in Toronto, and the local university was the University of Toronto, which is like, you know, the leading university of Canada. It was an excellent university. So so that was lucky that that was my local university. You know, and when I went there, there was this amazing program I discovered. And I think it was maybe we had something called grade 13 at that time in Ontario, which it doesn't exist anymore, but it's kind of like a pre-university thing. And yeah, my grade 13 world issues teacher pointed me to the program, I think. And it was a specialist program called International Development Studies, where it was amazing. It was a godsend because it was interdisciplinary. We did politics, economics, sociology, anthropology, soil science, environmental science, history, you know, because you'd be specializing in a certain area.
Yeah.
And at that time, I wanted to be with the FMLN in El Salvador. So Latin America was my area of specialization. Languages, we had to do all of that. It was amazing for me in that regard. And so that's what I did. And I also ended up doing anthropology because I became disillusioned with that thing, which I thought was so amazing as well, for a whole host of reasons. But anthropology I just loved. I was also critical of, again. I have this critical streak, as you can see. And Yeah. So when it also included a placement in the third world, right? And let me tell you what part of my critique. It was weird. The campus I was at, the Scarborough campus of the University of Toronto, was very, I guess the word used today is diverse, right? Multiracial, multi-ethnic, a lot of children of immigrants, you know, who would have been born there and grown up and stuff like that. So, and you know, it was it struck me, myself being a child of immigrants, that other immigrant children were, like, they used to take business, and they used to take economics. Like, those are two of the biggest things, right? Management and economics, sciences for some and stuff. But none of them wanted to go and save the world or save the countries where their parents came from, which is, and instead you had all these kind of you know, basically hippie type people, mainly of European background, you know.
The white guys were looking to save the world.
Yeah, you know. And so I was like, you know, one of the few whites there. And it was curious to me. And what was also curious, the social interaction, because while they wanted to save the world, and they used to dress in all these Latin American ponchos and tie this and all this, there were real Latin Americans on campus and real Thai people, but they weren't friends. You know, there was no real social interaction. And I found these things very interesting. You know, it's like abstractly, they embraced the idea, but when it came down to real people, there was something there, you know. And I found that very, very interesting.
Yes.
And
I can see that.
And I mean, even, you know, I've been also among, you know, the various immigrant, you know, children, let's say, you know, first generation people in Canada and whatnot. You know, they would kind of look at me and wonder why I'm in that program with those people.
Yeah.
And like, you know, they're all kind of like hippie, you know, privileged people, I guess, right? Because they're just kind of rather than looking to, you know, make some money or whatever it is, you know. And so I just found that dynamic really, really, really interesting. But and what was another interesting thing was that when I kind of had a change of heart with all this sort of observation and a lot of things going on with me personally, and me kind of changing my views and stuff. And I decided I didn't want to go to El Salvador anymore. I didn't want to be one of these save the world kind of people. I wanted to go back to Trinidad.
Okay.
And the program, which placed people, like, so it placed people in all sorts of, you know, locations around the world, Cambodia and Laos, and, you know, El Salvador and Nicaragua and stuff, which were very dangerous at the time. And Trinidad was not dangerous at the time, really. And but they didn't want me to go there. And I found that interesting. So you know, so there was this almost inbuilt bias that you shouldn't go back to the countries where you're from. So it's always this thing of
you to go, or they didn't want anybody to go.
No, they didn't want me to go there specifically because I had links there.
Got it.
So it was almost like inherently, it meant saving other people. Like the whole idea is to save other people.
Right.
And I actually fought them hard on it, and I won.
Yeah.
And
was that round one of your fights with academia?
Sorry?
Was that round one of your fights with academia?
No, that would have been round like 20. I from the time I went in, I was like always combative. I remember I had in my international relations class, it was an American professor we had, and his name was Rubinoff, and he was you know, what you call a realist, if you understand the terminology. So basically a pro-American, you know, blatant, you know, American interest, whatever, right? So this is 1980s Reagan era and stuff. And at that time, I at that time, as I was getting more radicalized, I was involved in so many different political groups, and that's how I also got into NGOs and MPOs, because to me it was always the same kind of thing. So I was involved with charities and stuff, but I was also involved in political movements and some very radical ones. And at a time I was involved in some anarchist groups in the 1980s.
Okay.
And it was weird because I was like a suburban anarchist kind of guy. And I would like travel down to this group in downtown who were squatting somewhere. But we had this college radio program, which I thought was so cool. College radio in the 80s. If you know, hey, that was amazing. Those are excellent days. Not enough has been written or analyzed about college radio. It's influenced culturally, politically, musically, all that. But anyways, so anyway, I remember the first day in class, I had this huge kind of battle with this guy, because he said something about how he thought colonialism was a good thing. Look at Afghanistan, Ethiopia, and at that time I just had no patience with that kind of stuff. I can understand why and what his argument was, but at the time I just had no patience. And so it's been a long common thing with me to voice my opinion, but I try to be as congenial as possible, though.
Right. Yes. You have learned that as you have matured, that yelling and screaming doesn't always get the point across.
That's right. But on the other hand too, although I always did like, these radical movements, because like my parents were so like normal, and my family, I always had a kind of grounding there, and like, and I didn't hate my parents, right? So like a lot of these people hate their dad, they hate their parents and stuff. I mean, okay, everybody hates their dad in a little way,
right? Yeah.
When they're a teenager.
More than just childhood rebellion, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I didn't like, hate my parents to, a pathological degree, like a lot of these people actually do. And, so I always try to like explain my positions to, my normal family, and so I respected their opinion, and I always liked normal people, right? A lot of the radicals hate normal people.
Yeah.
And I was never someone that hated normal people, and that kind of eventually, made me break completely with the whole kind of radical movements, because I just found, it was just, when you get to the extremes, it's very scary, in fact. And this is where the extremes of communism and fascism and all these things, because it's kind of like anti-people, anti-human at the core. And that was never my motivation. It was always, to help people, to make the world a better place.
Right.
And normal people, not just, freaks or whatever.
Right. And that's actually something that I've come across a lot as well, or learned, I guess. It's be for something, not against something. It's too easy to just be against something.
Exactly. Yeah. And you basically have to be grounded in that respect. And I think, I see a lot of the Antifa people these days, right? I see a lot of these radical protesters and stuff, and I recognize it. Because I knew people like that, and I taught students, right? So so I would see it there, and a lot of times, they're shouting all these things, now, it's against Trump or whatever, but and they're so intensely angry, and and it's not about Trump. It's not about, or it's not about the environment, or it's not about whatever it is they're protesting. It's something. It's usually about daddy, I find, when you dig deep down inside. but it's something else. And this just happens to be the outlet which they're raging against. It's kind of something similar I used to see at like clubs and pubs. Whenever if I used to like look at people fight like after they're drunk at like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or 3 in the morning or whatever, and I'd see somebody pummeling somebody, and I'd say, you know, this incident did not cause that rage. That is bottled rage from something else that this guy now has a chance to unleash it on this poor soul that just crossed him the wrong way at the wrong time. And that's kind of like, you know, it's a common thing. And it ties the personal to the political, the individual to the social. And I think a lot of times these things are missed.
Yeah, it's interesting because my theory, right? So I've never done any of these studies and whatnot, but I think that a lot of it, in fact, it's the breaking with the past, right? So young people always, I mean, in fact, they kind of have to break from the past.
Yeah.
And, you know, the question is, how do you break from the past?
That's right.
Hopefully, and so far, my kids, you know, my son is, you know, kind of pushing me to the side, but he doesn't hate me, and he's not running out trying to burn the world down.
Yeah.
You know, he would like to make his little corner of it his way. And so it's, how do you go about it?
That's right.
I was having a discussion earlier today, you know, in what we hear in the talking heads and the anger in Facebook and whatnot. I'm still convinced, whatever the number is, you hear the 5% on the ends.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's what you're talking about. These groups are the 5% on the ends.
Yeah. And I am not sure actually if it's growing more than 5%. Because you know, and this is where, you know, I kind of get more on, I disavow the left and right terms because I think it pigeonholes you too badly. But this is where people would call me a conservative or a social conservative.
Yeah.
I do think the breakdown of the family has a lot to do with it. I think that, you know, a lot of, you know, young men especially, but probably, you know, girls as well, young women, who grow up without a father, you know, have these sorts of deep issues and resentments there. And because I realize a lot of rebellion against authority is against your father. There's this deep there's a connection. The father is the first authoritarian figure, and it's kind of how you deal with that first authoritarian figure. And I mean, I remember too, I had to deal with that, right? Like, so, and you know, as a young man, you always have to deal with how you deal with your father when you disagree with him, and I came to terms with him and whatever differences, and still, you know, able to be friends. And if I need to be critical, I will be critical. But you know, we're equals now. I mean, I'm old, and so, but yeah, you know, I mean, I think that a lot of people don't get to resolve these things.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of self-introspection.
Yeah.
I
suspect that's true. So let's go back and for the listeners, Kirk, talk about where you truly separated from academia. Give us a few minutes of what happened.
Basically, I mean, I made the break I think it would not be unfair to say it was reckless, but I did it.
You were rebelling against Dad, though. So
sorry,
you were rebelling against Dad. So
no, because this was much later. I had passed that a long time ago, because this was, let's see, it was in the mid 2000s, and after I had been on a tenure track position at the university, And
Doing
I
what?
had become, sorry?
Doing what?
I was lecturing in the Department of Sociology at the University of the West Indies. I
Okay.
had also lectured at the Institute of Business there, and also
Okay.
actually it wasn't
Business
the
and
sociology, it was
sociology.
behavioral sciences, so it was government sociology, and right, they merged the departments. And I had become a well-known public figure, a public commentator, someone on TV,
Okay.
sorry, all the time, someone, speaking on politics, and a well-regarded person and so forth, and um, and also a critic,
Yeah.
and a critic of the way economic policy development, and underdevelopment, which I mean, that's why these countries are called third world, because there are real problems, and many of the problems are self-inflicted, and due to corruption and stupidity and other things. And so I would not hesitate to call these things out.
Right.
And I suppose that gave me some of my reputation too, that I would be honest and direct about these things. And so there was somebody who came, who I'd never heard of before or never known, and he came up to me and was telling me about all the stuff he had done, quietly, politically, in the background, how he very much liked what I was saying, that there was no one else saying this kind of stuff, and we really need to change society and shake it up and so forth. And he had this whole proposal of how we would do that, politically,
Okay.
socially, economically, and we started to do things together. And elections were coming up in the following year, and I decided to go all in, and I did, and I resigned from the university to go full time into politics.
Okay.
And we also had an economic project as well. That was kind of a miniature version of what we proposed for redevelopment of the whole island, in terms of the physical development, the use of natural resources, and it's an amazing project.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll cut the long story short, but it eventually, I don't want to say failed, because it's still there. It just has not been able to get off the ground because of very, very many factors, including people making sure it's not getting off the ground. And we had a lot of fights with that, and it's still continuing. But I had to leave because I spent over 10 years
Wow.
fighting that fight, and it really drained me in
Yeah.
so many ways.
So what are
And
they fighting against?
fighting against
Briefly.
sorry.
I said briefly. You don't have to.
Yeah. I mean, fighting against the corruption, the elitism, the small-mindedness, and the self-satisfaction of the elites, right? Which is common in
Right.
so many third world countries, and that's why the countries are the way they are, because the elites are comfortable, while the mass of the population is not.
Right.
And so and instead of, I mean, because I was, in many ways, I was enticed to be part of that elite, and I always rejected it, because I did not want to be part of that. I want still to see, better development in the country, and yeah, so and the lawyers and the bankers and the judges and and the politicians, they're all connected
Yep.
and it's just like I mean, in in a North American context, I say in Canada, the US, or England, or wherever your listeners might be, in a bigger country, you can think of a small town, right? Because
Yes.
right, so we're in a small town, you'll never work here again, or
Right.
where one guy owns everything, or a small clique owns everything, and
Yeah.
they can really, they monopolize stuff, and they control it, and they limit people's opportunities, and all this kind of stuff. In a small country, it's a very similar thing,
Yeah.
and so that's really sort of what we've been up against. And my former political partner, he's still at it. I still have, he still has my moral support and everything, but I really had to go off and just rebuild where I was at. I just could not. I just had to leave. It took too much of a toll, and that's how I did get on to the, these services that I'm offering. How you came to know me. It's from rebuilding myself that way, rebuilding my professional network, rebuilding my my reputation in the academic world and all that kind of stuff.
So Kirk, we've talked about your high school, going into college. You were a college professor, tenure track, then you went off into politics. And you're right, we ran into each other because you're talking to academics who want to make a transition out of academia. As my listeners know, and as you and I have talked about, I've got a PhD in genetics. I spent 12 years at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, ended up faculty there. It's the second ranked pediatric hospital or research institution in the United States. And I left there, went into business or the business world for a year and a half, and been working for myself for about 5 years. So I was very interested when you were talking about helping academics change direction or change course in life. And so tell us a little bit about that. What would drive somebody in academia? How would they know that maybe they should change direction?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for different people, I suppose they would have different motivations. And I suppose, there are some people who I talk to where they're interested in not really in changing direction, but expanding their influence. Okay. So they're not unhappy with their jobs or anything. And I suppose when I tell my story, a lot of people feel that, oh, well, it's only for disgruntled people or people who are critical of academia. And that's not what I mean. And maybe sometimes when I tell my story, it does come off as too negative, because, but I do respect, academia and so forth. But in the world of politics and change, I do believe that the university has, it puts inherent shackles on you. But that's my view, and people, you don't have to accept it, and that's fine.
I could talk about that at length, and I've got to agree. Academia, what I keep talking about, so now I'm in entrepreneurial world, startups and accelerators. As an academic, it would take us a year to get a grant. The grant lasted for 5 years. So we viewed life in 5-year chunks.
That's right.
And once you get outside of academia, if you're talking more than 6 months, you're crazy, right?
So, another thing, when you talk about getting out of academia, I remember I did my PhD in the UK, and that was an amazing experience, and a lot of connections and stuff I made there. But that exposed me to a lot of things that I was not exposed to before. The way London is so connected to so many things in the world, and when people were telling me how the brightest people in the world are actually not at universities, that was like a shock to me. Yeah. Because I always believed the smartest people in the world were at universities. Yeah. And it I heard people insult academics that way, those who can do and those who can't teach. Right. That's a common thing, and you kind of take it as a, but I really sort of understood the truth of it when I became closer to movers and shakers in the real world, in whatever field it was in, and I realized, actually, the smartest people, the most cutting edge stuff is actually outside of the university. It's not, and as I said, it was a shock to me, because I had always sort of believed that, these academics, were the cutting edge of thinking, and that's actually not the case.
Yeah. One way that I look at it graciously is academics tend to go really, really, really deep, right? They'll spend a career on one protein
Yeah,
in my background.
yeah,
Whereas people outside of academia have to pull together from all multiple disciplines.
yeah,
And again, to be gracious, right? I'm like,
yeah.
great that we've got them both.
That's right,
Um,
exactly. And of course, within universities, there are, incredibly erudite
Absolutely.
specialists, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and where that type of work, would be impossible to do elsewhere, So
Yeah.
so there definitely are, some incredible people and incredible work done. Um,
Yeah. But
but
you're right.
of
When you
course,
get out
yeah,
into the real world, you see, I, one simple example actually is one of my partners in consulting. He spent 35 years in with the Air Force, and he's doing his own stuff now. And he sees connections and movements across
yeah,
the country, and he's like, okay, we can see that money's going to be moving this way.
yeah,
So, that means this. And okay, it's 2020, it's an election year. So both parties, they're going to be basically buying votes. And, Pence is from this state and he has an interest in this topic. And the kind of stuff
yeah.
that I'm just like, what?
Yeah. Because in academia, you're supposed to say
Right.
compartmentalized, and
Yeah.
yeah. Which is why I always loved interdisciplinary studies, which I ended up always doing.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, but yeah, that's absolutely right. It's the type of thinking, and I think for the majority of people in academia, they are not at the sort of most erudite level. They're at the level where it's mundane,
Yeah.
and and yeah, there's a whole fight there, and I do think that universities have become so politicized, with left wing
Yeah.
ideology now, and the whole political correctness, and there's a real constraint on speech and thought, what you can say, what you can research, and it just seems really, really an unfree place,
Yeah.
not a place of free thought,
Right.
which always has been the attraction of intellectual life for me.
Right. And that's interesting because I always say, I assume that it was the way people talk about, but yeah, it is no longer a place where you go to be challenged, where you go to have your beliefs challenged and to be free to say absolutely everything and to learn how to make a reasonable, rational decision. Maybe you'll change your mind, or maybe
Yeah,
you'll come up with a good counter argument or whatever.
exactly. Maybe you'll
Now,
learn. Yeah, exactly.
now it's don't run into anything that you don't like.
That's right. Yeah, it's like, and again, I really do think it has to do with the whole either breakdown or changing of the family structure, where where it's like these people are so sensitive because they have so many psychological issues that you dare not make them feel bad.
Right.
Like that's the worst thing in the world. It's just, I don't know. It's to be in that environment, and then they have all this insanity now. I mean, I don't know how much is blown up by the media,
Right.
but how many genders and how many pronouns and all this kind of stuff. It's just, oh my
Yeah.
God, it's insane. It's really, really, really insane.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And again, so I mean, for me, it starts from the fact that you can't question it.
yeah,
Right?
exactly.
You could even have people saying whatever, Facebook
Yeah,
had 72 genders at some point. As long as you could allow people to say no
that's
and
right.
let's talk about it. Let's have a reasoned debate. Let's not have protests and yell and scream.
Yeah,
But, whatever you say, pick your side and pick your
that's
argument
right.
and whatnot. That's
Exactly.
what I think academia used to be.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And it certainly was. It certainly was freer. It certainly was. And so, I mean, so for me, I was kind of originally targeting people who who felt that they wanted to make a contribution. They wanted to have an impact, but for some reason, this culture that we're talking about on campus is keeping them back. Um, this fear of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time, um, or maybe it's just the routineness of it all, or maybe the fact that you have all this admin work or whatever that just keeps you from whatever the initial spark was for you
Yeah.
to get into it in the first place, and that it kind of kills your enthusiasm, kills your soul, kills your passion. That for me, I know that being in the media, and the amazing thing about being in the media when you're on TV, especially being in the mass media, is that you don't realize how many people you are speaking to and
Yeah.
who is watching you.
Right.
And the type of connect, and the people that was, be in touch with you after because they saw something or they liked something you said or you did, and then that opens up an opportunity. Oh, well, why don't you come and do this? Or, and then people would ask you, oh, can you come and speak at this, or can you come and help out with that? And it's amazing. And so it's not just you're teaching students and trying to get them to read the readings, and they want to know if it's on the test,
Right. Exactly.
and all this kind of stuff. It's like you're really affecting what's happening in the world,
Right.
just by talking about it to a general audience in the media. And now with social media, it gives you an opportunity as well, so that you don't have to wait on being asked by major media as well. You can be your own media,
Right.
and you can do the two. So I've been giving my advice, because I've been doing this since since the late 90s. I've been in the media,
Right.
either the written media or TV. I've been on TV and stuff since the 2000s, and I've been writing in newspapers and stuff since the late 90s. So, just sharing, my insights and journeys, and sort of systematizing what I did, because, a lot of that time I was in academia, and as and when I left, I continued that stuff.
Yeah.
But, I thought, if there are people who either, you could, I mean, just as I was in academia and doing that, of course you can do that.
Yeah.
But also if you, want to branch out and maybe do something different, that I can sort of give you pointers there too. But basically, people who already have, intellectual authority, they have papers, journal articles, they've studied a topic, they're experts already, but for whatever reason, maybe they might be introverted, because there's a certain type of personality that's kind of attracted to academia.
Yes.
Sometimes they have these quirks that might not make them very sociable or something.
Right.
Sometimes.
Exactly.
That's all part of it.
Yeah.
And so it's to kind of help people, if they want to take that step, whatever it might be, because it's an area where I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
To kind of help people out.
And so that's interesting. We talk about it sort of deprecatingly when we're in academia. Hey, I published this thing and it's going into something that no one's ever going to read.
Yeah.
So, you offer the opportunity. So, my brother, he's a college professor, and he studied land politics, privatization of Russia, or whatever.
Right.
And he wrote what I'm sure is a beautiful thesis, and I think I got a copy of it, and I probably opened it. You know, he continues to publish, and I'm sure it's fascinating.
Yeah,
And I bet there are 3 other people in the world, you know, probably a
that's
couple,
right.
5 or 6 in the world who have excitement. But for instance, if he wanted to make an impact, then if he could actually get out beyond the dusty old books that nobody looks
Absolutely.
at.
And I mean, and you see, and that's the thing, and that's exactly the type of person who I
Yeah,
like to help, right? Because today, you know, Russia, it's like Russia's everywhere, right? So,
yeah,
and he's got all this specialized knowledge,
right.
right? That he can repurpose and retool.
Yeah.
You know, like when I finished my PhD, uh, I did it on some very obscure. I did it on the history of Trinidad and Tobago politics, and very, very obscure things. You know, going back to the 1920s when we had our first elections and stuff like that, and all sorts of things that people forgot, hardly knew, and I mean, I loved it, but I always expected it to be obscure.
Yeah.
And but coincidentally, the year I returned from my PhD was an election year.
Ah,
And well, I had befriended, I'd become close to one of the country's leading intellectuals, and when he went on TV, he had insisted to the producer that they invite me on as well, and so I was invited, and I mean, now I had that help, and that's great, and that's another thing I try to do too, to mentor people and to help them, because that helped me. But when you're there, you can get all the help you want, but when the camera's on you and they ask you a question, it's just up to you.
yes.
How you answer and what you say, it doesn't matter who's backing you or whatever. It's all up to you.
Yes.
But yeah, so I performed well, I suppose, and um, and yeah, but then we had an election, and the other year, and then another year. It was like an electoral crisis. We unlike the states, we don't have fixed terms. You can call elections early
Okay.
for various reasons. It's more like the British system.
Yeah, I was
And,
going to
and
say we hear about Britain with Brexit all the time. Yeah.
that's right. So we had 3 elections in 3 years. And so here I just finished my PhD, and I'd had this wealth of knowledge in my head, just at the tip of my tongue, that
Yeah.
no one else had. And totally coincidentally, I had no idea that this information would end up being popular.
Right.
But just like your brother with all this Russian information, I am sure there are some really obscure things that he's
Right.
dug up that will be very, very pertinent in
Right.
today's environment where everybody is concerned about Russia. You know?
Absolutely. Yes.
And you know, and this sort of stuff that we may be, you know, researching and publishing in obscure journals on obscure topics, but that information can be retold, it can be used in other stories, in other contexts
Yeah.
that are relevant, which people want to hear, and
Right.
and that's something I help academics do.
Yeah.
How to take the things that they think nobody will care about, nobody will have any interest in, and help them see, no, look, people
Right.
will be interested in this.
Yeah. And there's 2 sides to that. First, if you're going to spend your life studying something, I would want it to be something that would matter and somebody would care about. And secondly, people probably don't even know that your information exists,
That's right.
and so they don't know to care.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly. Because and this is what I tell people, you know, there's one point in your life when you didn't care about that.
Right.
And something made you care.
Right.
Now, if you can put yourself back in that situation where you had that aha moment that
Right.
this is actually important, if you're able to translate that to a general public where you were just like them, you didn't think this was important, but then something made you realize. If you're able to take the public on that journey to
Right.
understand why your seemingly obscure topic is important, and you're
Yeah.
able to put it in that context, then what you thought was obscure and nobody would be interested in is actually important, because you thought, if you thought it was important, there are going to be other people who would also understand why it's important.
Yes. And again, if you studied it, hopefully it was important.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's what I keep coming back to. You may think it's unimportant, but if you spent your time, hopefully it had a purpose and a point.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And you must have you must have figured it was important at some point.
yeah.
And then you would be reading other people's works, and they would have thought it was important.
Right.
And you would have been taught that.
People cited you who think
That's right, exactly. And you would have had professors who taught you, and they would have thought it's important.
Yes.
So it's just it's kind of like when people use jargon.
Yeah.
And it makes people's eyes glaze over,
Yes.
understandably. But you have to be able to step back from the jargon to understand, well, this jargon is really shorthand for something else.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is why my link to normal people has always I think put me in good stead. Because I kind of always think of having to explain it to my mother. and I think of it in that way. And I've done that a lot in my life. I've tried to explain a lot of things that I felt passionate about to my mother, and she might not be, into that kind of stuff, but, I able to break it down in a simple way to make it to make her see the relevance. And I think that's great practice for people. I've always said, if you can explain it to a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old and have them see it, that's a very important skill to have.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I like when I watch your videos and listen to you, is you do speak so that anybody can understand it, and there's not all this techno jargon and all that kind of stuff. And that's one thing that I'm happy being out of academia is, I've always been one who has been good at communicating with anybody.
Yeah.
The lowest level person up to the CEO or whatever.
Yeah.
And the way to do that, it's funny, right? So many technical people don't get it. You probably want to talk to both of those people the same way.
That's right.
Because your CEO might be the brilliantest guy or girl ever. However, they don't know what you're doing. They don't care that you've got 15 minutes and they've got an 18-hour day. And just make it easy.
Yeah.
And so many technical people think that if they sound really smart using big, long words, that impresses people. It tires people in my experience.
That's right.
Yeah. So this has been great talking. I really appreciate your time. And so if some academic is interested in adding some additional outlet, let's say, what would you suggest that they do?
Yeah, well, they can take I have a free masterclass where I go through some of the steps, and then I also offer free strategy calls. So I do offer these free resources to help people out. And, if they want to take it further, I also have some paid services as well. But my free stuff is, is good enough. If you can work with that, you can take that. And I have that at becomeapublicintellectual.com. Right? So you can sign up for that there. And then I'm actually releasing a course very, very soon called Bulletproof Podcast Formula. I anticipate within the next week or two. And I've been talking about it a lot on LinkedIn. And that's at bulletproofpodcastformula.com.
Okay.
Right? So I'll be having that there. That particular site is not up and running as yet. It's just a test site for now. Because, as I said, in the next 2 weeks, it will be up for sure. But becomeapublicintellectual.com, that's there. And you can check me out on LinkedIn, on Facebook, whatever, So on YouTube, my YouTube channel, podcast there, Independent Thought and Freedom. So you can check that out.
And And if someone wants to actually contact you directly,
Yeah.
what would be the best way?
Right. Well, you can contact me. I mean, a PM on Facebook or on LinkedIn is fine. My email address, I can leave it for you there.
Okay.
It's Dr. Kirk Meighoo at becomeapublicintellectual.com.
Okay.
So, I will put that, I will give that to you so you can have the link there, and they could contact me directly there.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you very much again. It's been great talking to you. And yeah, last time we talked was fantastic as well. So really excited about what you do. I know that there are a lot of intellectuals, academics who could benefit from an additional outlet, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, because it really, sometimes you feel crushed in your job and your routine, and you feel that you know that you see people on TV talking about a subject that you're an expert in, and you say they're idiots.
Right.
I should be up there. And
Exactly.
and you should be up there. So
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Dr. Kirk Meighoo, who will help you to be that one instead of that idiot that you see on TV.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely.